Hello, guys. Welcome to this reading of My Side of the Mountain, close reading, page 93 through 107. I will be reading kind of quick. I got a slideshow going on. Please follow along if you can do the book share. If not, please just pay attention. Watch the video all the way through before you take the quiz at the end. Okay, page 93, in which we all learn about Halloween. Halloween, huh? October 28th. I've been up and down the mountain every day for a week, watching to see if walnuts and hickory nuts are ripe. Today I found the squirrels all over the trees harvesting them furiously. So I have decided that ripe or not, I must gather them. It's me or the squirrels. Tethered Frightful in the hickory tree while I went to the walnut tree and filled pouches. Frightful protected the hickory nuts. She keeps the squirrels so busy scolding her that they don't have time to take the nuts. They are quite terrified by her. It is a good scheme. I shout and bang the tree and keep them away while I gather. I've never seen so many squirrels. They hang from the slender branches, they bounce through the limbs. They seem to come from the whole forest. They must pass messages along to each other, messages that tell what kind of nuts and where the trees are. A few days later, my storehouse rolling with nuts, I began to race for apples. Entering this race were squirrels, raccoons, and a fat old skunk who looks as if he could eat not another bite. He was ready to sleep his autumn meal off, and I resented him because he did not need my apples. However, I did not toy with him. I gathered what apples I could, cut some in slices, and dried them out in the boulder in the sun. Some I put in the storeroom tree to eat right away. They were a little wormy, but it was wonderful to eat an apple again. Then one night, this was all done. The crop was gathered, sat down to make a few notes when the Baron came sprinting into sight. And remember, the Baron's the his little weasel friend. He actually bounced up and licked the edges of my turtle shell bowl, stormed frightful, and came to my feet. Baron Weasel, I said, it is nearing Halloween. Are you playing tricks or treats? I handed him the remains of my turtle soup dinner and, fascinated, watched him devour it. The Baron chews with his back molars and chews with a ferocity I have not seen in him before. His eyes gleam, the lips curl back from his white pointed teeth, and he frowns like an angry man. If I move towards him, a rumble starts in his chest that keeps me back. He flashes glances at me. It is indeed strange to be looked in the eyes by the fearless wild animal. There is something human about his beady glance, perhaps because that glance tells me something. Tells me he knows who I am and that he does not want me to come any closer. The Baron Weasel departed after his feast. Frightful, who was drawn up as skinny as a stick, relaxed and fluffed her feathers, and then I said to her, see, he got his treats, no tricks. Then something occurred to me. I reached inside the door and pulled out my calendar stick. I counted 28, 29, 30, 31. Frightful, that old weasel knows. It is Halloween. Let's have a Halloween party. Swiftly, I made piles of cracked nuts, smoked rabbit, and crawfish. I even added 2 of my apples. This food was an invitation to the squirrels, foxes, raccoons, opossums, even the birds that lived around me to come have a party. When Frightful is tethered to her stump, some of the animals and birds will only come close enough to scream at her. So Bird and I went inside the tree, propped open the flap, and waited. Not much happened that night. I learned that it takes a little time for the woodland message to get around, but they do. Before the party, I had been very careful about leaving food out because I needed every mouthful. I took the precautions of rolling a stone in front of my store tree. The harvest moon rose. Frightful and I went to sleep. At dawn, we abandoned the party. I left the treats out, however, since it was a snappy, gold-colored day. We went off to get some more rabbit skins to finish my winter underwear. We had lunch along the creek, stewed mussels and wild potatoes. We didn't get back until dusk because I discovered some wild rice, and an oxbow of the stream. There was no more than a handful. I put some pictures in here. This is wild rice, kind of like tall grass a little bit, and you open this up and there's a seed in there. And then these are called oxbows in the river. I actually just found out what this was referring to recently. So, like back in the old days, oxes used to plow and they'd put their heads inside things kind of shaped like this. So when you see something like this is referred to as an oxbow. Home that night, everything seemed peaceful enough. A few nuts were gone to the squirrels, I thought. I baked the fish and leaves and ate a small, precious amount of wild rice. It was marvelous. As I settled down to scrape the rabbit skins of the day, my neighbor, the skunk, marched right into the campground and set to work on the smoked rabbit. I made some Halloween notes. The moon is coming up behind the aspens. It is big as a pumpkin and as orange. And I found a picture of this big orange moon. This is a harvest moon. So, shoot. Let's go back. There we go. So this is called a harvest moon. You can see these around here. When people used to see these big orange moons, they knew it was time to harvest their crops, which is why they call it a harvest moon. The winds are cool. The stars are like electric light bulbs. I'm just inside the doorway with my turtle shell lamp burning so that I can see to write this. Something is moving beyond the second hemlock. Frightful is very alert, as if there are things all around us. Halloween was over at midnight last night, but for us it is just the beginning. That's how I feel, anyhow. But it just may be my imagination. I wish Frightful would stop pulling her feathers in and drawing herself up like a spring. I keep thinking that she feels things. Here comes Jesse C. James. He will want the venison. He didn't get the venison. There was a snarl, and a big raccoon I've never seen walk past him growling and looking ferocious. Jesse C. stood motionless, I might say scared stiff. He held his head at an angle and let the big fellow eat. Jesse so much as rolled his eyes, that old coon would sputter at him. And I recorded this picture. I know this raccoon's still kind of cute, but Jesse C. James, or Jesse C. Coon, or whatever his name is, was a small raccoon, and so a big mean raccoon came in. It grew dark and I couldn't see much. An eerie yelp behind the boulder announced that the red fox of the meadow was nearing. He gave me goosebumps. He stayed just beyond my store tree, weaving back and forth on silent feet. Every now and then he would cry, a wavery owl-like cry. I wrote some more. The light of my turtle lamp cast leaping shadows to the beech nuts as has come a small gray animal I can't make out. Now I see it. It's a flying squirrel. That surprised me. Never seen a flying squirrel around here, but of course I haven't been up much after sunset. When it grew too dark to see, I lit a fire, hoping it would not end the party. It did not. And the more I watched, the more I realized that all these animals were familiar with my camp. A white-footed mouse walked over my woodpile as if it were his. I put out the candle and fell asleep when the fire turned to coals. Much later, I was awakened by screaming. I lifted my head and looked into the moonlit forest. A few guests still lingering at the party saw me move and dash bashfully into the ground cover. One was big and slender. I thought perhaps a mink. As I slowly came awake, I realized that screaming was coming from behind me. Something was in my house. I jumped up and shouted, and 2 raccoons skittered under my feet. I reached for my candle, slipped on hundreds of nuts and fell. When I finally got a light and looked about me, I was dismayed to see what a mess my guests had made of my treehouse. They had found the cache of acorns and beech nuts and had tossed them all over my bed and floor. The party was getting rough. I chased the raccoons into the night and stumbled over a third animal and was struck by a wet, stinging spray. It was a skunk. I was drenched, so I got used to the indignity and the smell. I saw the raccoons cavort around my fireplace and dodged past me. They were back in my tree before I could stop them. A bat winged in from the darkness and circled the tallow candle. It was Halloween, and the goblins were at work. Thought of all the ash cans I had knocked over on the streets of New York. Seemed utterly humorless. Having invited all these neighbors, I was now faced with the problem of getting rid of them. The raccoons were feeling so much at home that they snatched up beech nuts, bits of dried fish and venison, and tossed them playfully into the air. They were too full to eat anymore, but were having a marvelous time making toys out of my hard-won winter food supply. I herded the raccoons out of the tree and laced the door. I was breathing relief when I turned my head to the left, for I sensed someone watching me. There in the moonlight, his big ears erect, on his head sat the red fox. He was smiling. I know he was. I shouted, "Stop laughing!" and he vanished like a magician handkerchief. All this had awakened Frightful, who was flopping in the dark in the tree. I reached in around the deer flap to stroke her back to calmness. She grabbed me so hard I yelled, and the visitors moved to the edge of my camp at my cry. Smelling to the sky, bleeding in the hand, and robbed of part of my hard-won food, I threw wood on the fire and sent an enormous shaft of light into the night. Then I shouted. The skunk moved farther away. The raccoon galloped off a few feet and galloped back. I snarled at them. They went to the edge of the darkness and stared at me. I'd learned something that night from that very raccoon bossing Jesse C. James. The other two animals, might is right. I was biggest, and I was oldest, and I was going to tell them so. I growled and snarled and hissed and snorted. It worked. They understood and moved away. Some looked back, and their eyes glowed. The red eyes chilled me. Never had there been a more real Halloween night. I looked up, expecting to see a witch. The last bat of the season darted in the moonlight. I dove to my bed and tied the door. There are no more notes about Halloween. And that's pretty scary. If you guys have ever been camping and gotten raccoons in your camp, they can be a real menace and be really mean too and hiss at you and try to steal your food. All right, the next section, page 101, in which I find out what to do with hunters. That party had a moral ending. Don't feed wild animals. And you guys should not feed wild animals either. Make sure you keep your food out away from where they can get it. I picked up and counted my walnuts and hickory nuts. I was glad to discover there was more mess than loss. I decided that I'd not only live until spring, but that I still had more nuts than the squirrels on Griblies, including flying squirrels. In early November, I was awakened one morning by a shot from a rifle. Hunting season had begun. I had forgotten all about that. To hide from a swarm of hunters was truly going to be a trip. They would be behind every tree and on every hill and dale. They would be shooting at everything that moved, and here was I in deerskin pants and dirty brown sweater looking like a deer. I had decided, like the animals, to say, hold up the first day of the season. I whittled the fork and finished my rabbit skin winter underwear. I cracked a lot of walnuts. The second day of the hunting season, I stuck my head out of the door and decided my yard was messy. I picked it up so that it looked like a forest floor. The third day of the hunting season, some men came in and camped by the gorge. I tried to steal down the other side of the mountain to the north stream, found another camp of hunters there, and went back to my tree. By the end of the week, both Frightful and I were indeed in need of exercise. Gunshots were still snapping around the mountain. I decided to go see Miss Turner at the library. About an hour later, I wrote this. Got as far as the edge of the hemlock grove when a shot went off practically at my elbow. I didn't have Frightful's Jesse's in my hands and she took off at the blast. I climbed the tree. There's a hunter so close to me he could have bitten me, but apparently he was busy watching his deer. I was able to get up into the high branches without being seen. First I looked around for Frightful. I could see her nowhere. I wanted to whistle for her, but didn't think I should. I sat still and looked and wondered if she'd go home. I watched the hunter track his deer. The deer was still running. From where I could see it plainly going towards the old Gribley farm site. Quietly, I climbed higher and watched. Then, of all things, it jumped the stone fence and fell dead. Thought I would stay in the tree until the hunter quartered his kill and dragged it to the road. Ah, then it occurred to me that he wasn't even going to find that deer. He was going off at an angle, and from what I could see, the deer had dropped in a big bank of dry ferns that would be hard to find. I got to be nerve-wracking at this point. I could see my new jacket lying in the ferns and the hunter looking for it. Closed my eyes and mentally steered him to the left. Then good old Frightful should wing down the mountain and was sitting in a sapling maple not far from the deer. She saw the man and screamed. He looked in her direction. Heaven knows what he thought she was, but he turned and started towards her. She rustled her wings, climbed into the sky, and disappeared over my head. I did want to whistle to her, but feared for my deer, myself, and her. I hung in the tree and waited about half an hour. Finally, the man gave up his hunt. His friends called, and he went on down the mountain. I went down the tree. In the dry ferns lay a nice young buck. I covered it carefully with some of the stones from the fence and more ferns and rushed home. I whistled, and down from the top of my hemlock came Frightful. I got a piece of birch bark to write all this on. I wouldn't get too anxious and go for the deer too soon. We'll wait until dark and go get our dinner and my new jacket. I'm beginning to think I'll have all the deer hide and venison I can use. There must be other lost game in the mountain. And then this was the last picture I had, which he wants to make a jacket similar to this one for him to wear in the winter. This is made out of deer skin. I got the deer after dark, and I was quite right. Before the season was over, I got 2 more deer in the same way. However, with the first deer to work on, the rest of the season passed quickly. I had lots of scraping and preparing to do. My complaint was that I did not dare light a fire and cook that wonderful meat. I was afraid of being spotted. I'd smoked venison, nuts, meats, and hawthorn berries. Hawthorn berries taste a little bit like apples. They're smaller and drier than apples. They also have big seeds in them. The hawthorn bush is easy to tell because it has big red, shiny thorns on it. Each day the shooting lessened as the hunters left the hills and went home. As it cleared out, Frightful and I were freer and freer to roam. The air temperature now was cold enough to preserve the venison, so I didn't smoke the last 2 deer. About 2 weeks after, I heard the first alarming shot. Cut off a beautiful steak, built a bright fire, and when the embers were glowing, I had myself a grilled dinner. I soaked some dried puffballs in water, and when they were big and moist, I fried them with wild onions and skimpy old wild carrots and stuffed myself until I felt kindly towards all men. I wrote this. Hunters are excellent friends if used correctly. Don't let them see you, but follow them closely. Preferably use the tops of trees for this purpose. For hunters don't look up. They look down and to the right and left and straight ahead. So if you stay in the trees, you can not only see what they shoot, but where it falls. And if you're extremely careful, you can sometimes get to it before they do and hide it. That's how I got my 3rd deer. I had a little more trouble tanning these hides because the water in my oak stump kept freezing at night. It was getting cold. I began wearing my rabbit fur underwear most of the morning. It was still too warm at noon to keep it on, but it felt good at night. I slept in it until I got my blanket made. I did not scrape the deer hair off my blanket. I liked it on. Because I had grown, 1 deer skin wouldn't cover me. I sewed part of another one to it. The 3rd hide I made into a jacket. I just cut a rectangle with a hole in it for my head and sewed over straight wide sleeves. I put enormous pockets all over it using every scrap I had, including the pouches I made last summer. It looked like a cross between a Russian military blouse and a carpenter's apron, but it was warm, roomy, and I thought handsome. All right, guys, that's it. Thanks for watching all the way through. Make sure you guys take that assessment, and I'll see you guys on Friday for our Zoom meeting.